Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another video in palette week, where every single day for 7 straight days I am posting some sort of palette themed content. And today we are discussing 10 eyeshadow palettes that I almost purchased, but I'm glad I didn't. I will say I do feel like compared to last year or even years past, I have definitely been a little bit more selective in the palettes that I'm purchasing, and even palettes that initially draw my attention, I am not instantly, in most cases, instantly going to purchase them. And I'm really trying to think about my current palette collection and do I have something that's similar enough, or do I have a couple of palettes that dupe the palette that I'm interested in? Because I will say that my palette collection has just felt a little bit overwhelming. And I don't know if it's because I'm doing a pan matte palette. I don't know what it is, but I feel like my palette collection is feeling just like a wee bit overwhelming lately. So I thought it would be fun to discuss palettes I'm glad I didn't buy. So if you're interested, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Alright guys, I would love to hear in the comments below what palettes you almost purchased, but you're glad I didn't. And shout out to this palette because it's right in front of me. I have posted a video similar to this before, talking about like makeup products, and it may have been palettes in general that I'm glad I didn't buy, and I talked about the Natasha Denona pastel palette, and then I really wanted it again shortly after filming that video. And now it's in my life. But I'm going to pull my phone out just because I took screenshots of every palette that I wanted to talk about so that I didn't forget anything. And we are going to start with an indie brand eyeshadow palette, and I'll scoot over a little bit so I can post pictures over here. We are going to start with the Inspired palette by Adept Cosmetics. Now I will say I've always been a huge fan of Adept Cosmetics. I have loved their single shadows for years. I think I first started purchasing from Adept in either 2019 or 2020, and I've always been a huge fan of their single shadows. I think they have a super unique formula, and I do have 3 eyeshadow palettes from them already. And so when I saw this palette was releasing, instantly it caught my eyes because of all of the green shades. I absolutely love green eyeshadow, and this was something that was like literally in my cart and I was ready to purchase but held back. I also love that neon yellow, and ultimately I decided not to purchase this, and I'm glad that I didn't, because some of the other Adept palettes that are currently in my collection I still haven't gotten around to fully testing. And so I feel like this is a palette that I would have been super excited about, but then once I had it, I didn't reach for it that often just because it's not like an everyday palette. And in general, Adept shadows aren't shadows that I'm reaching for like when I create work looks. Not that I couldn't, but because they're often multi-chromes or at bare minimum like these really beautiful duochromes, they're just not something I'm reaching for on an everyday basis. And I don't think I would have gotten much use out of this palette, if at all, just based on those things alone. Do I think it would have been a beautiful palette? Do I think it's a beautiful palette? Absolutely. But I just don't feel like it would have added value to my collection, or it would have collected dust, and therefore it wouldn't have been worth me spending my money on. So that is the first palette I'm glad that I did not buy. Next up, I have this one from Melt Cosmetics. This was the palette that I believe they released this year on 4/20, and I've purchased most Melt Cosmetics, especially the ones that they release around April. Not for the holiday, but I just happen to typically like those palettes. I did not purchase the 4/20 palette though. I don't even think I saw teaser photos of this palette before seeing it on the Sephora website. So seeing it on the Sephora website, instantly I was like, I need to purchase this right now. I put it in my cart. I was literally like getting ready to check out. I was like getting my rewards in there, or like promos or whatever. And then I was like, wait a minute, like let me slow down and look at what shades are even in this palette. And as I really started to break the palette down, I was like, okay, there's a bright red shade that I'm probably never gonna use. There's some blue shades that I definitely won't reach for that frequently. And Melt Cosmetics can be really hit or miss. I will say it's one of those brands that I do feel like I almost have this collectionist mentality. And it's not even necessarily for the eyeshadow palettes, but I think that they put a lot of time, effort, and thought into the way that they package their products and the like artwork. And so it's almost like a collect it for the packaging rather than like the actual product inside. But I don't want to do that. And with feeling a little bit more overwhelmed by my palette collection, I was like, there's nothing in this palette. There's not even like a shade in this palette I feel like I would be buying this palette for. Like there's not a shade that like is like, oh my gosh, I don't have that in my collection somewhere else. So I didn't purchase this, and I'm glad that I didn't. Next up, you guys saw this palette right here, the Dominique Cosmetics. I forget what this is called, and of course the screenshot that I have taken of this doesn't have the name, but you would have seen this in my Sephora VIB shop with me, and I thought for sure I was going to purchase this palette. Like I thought hands down this was like a non-negotiable, definitely going to purchase it. But as I was trying to narrow down my Sephora cart so that I could purchase items that I was more excited about, I really started to think about why I wanted this palette in the first place. And I think part of it was that top row looks really sparkly and really pretty, but I have so many single shadows that are sparkly and pretty. I have, it's not in front of me right now, but I have the Nearly Neutral palette from Glaminatrix, I believe, that I still haven't tested yet, that everybody raves about being really sparkly and really pretty. I have my LH Cosmetics palette that has really sparkly, like I have so many metallic, sparkly, foil shadows in my collection. I didn't need the palette for that. And then looking at the matte shadows, I'm like, okay, there's a black shadow that I won't use. There's a shadow that looks like a white almost that I can use as a lid setting shade, but like meh. And then there's like some neutral, like I was like, I definitely don't need this palette, and I'm not sad that I didn't purchase it. It's not a palette that I still think about, and I'm actually really glad I didn't buy this one. Next up, when I saw that Huda Beauty was releasing new Obsessions palettes, I was instantly interested because I love Huda Beauty eyeshadow, and even though I think her Obsessions palettes can be pretty hit or miss, I get really excited about every time she releases them. These were all matte palettes, and I was really interested in the more like mauve purple palette. But then I really started to think about it, and I was like, when do I ever do an all matte look? Almost never. Like I love a shimmer on the lid. I love a sparkle. And also, I'm just like not super inspired by the color story. I'm overwhelmed by my palette collection, and I just like literally don't need, like I just do not need. I have all of these shades a million times over in my palette collection. Why am I purchasing it? And that is the conclusion that I came to, and I am not mad that I didn't buy this. Next up is this palette right here from Lys Beauty, which I haven't gone onto the Sephora website to even see, but has this actually, like I feel like I saw this on Trend Mood, and then I like don't ever know if I saw it actually released in Sephora, because I went onto the Sephora website because I wanted to order it right away, and thankfully it wasn't there when I logged on, and I just haven't thought to look for it since. First of all, I think initially I was interested in this one. Lys is not as expensive as a lot of other brands at Sephora, and I'm very interested just in the things that they release. Even if it's not a makeup product that I typically reach for, I'm always interested in what they're releasing. Second, I thought it was like, initially I thought it was cute that it was in like the triangle packaging, but I think that would be quite irritating actually. And looking at this palette, like I feel like it might actually be really difficult to use just based on like getting your brush in each of the shades. And I also think I have these shades a million times over, and the two pops of color I'm like, I really wouldn't have reached for. I just don't think I would have gotten used out of this palette. Like it would have sat, it would have collected dust in my collection, and even if it was less expensive than a lot of other Sephora brands, it still wouldn't have been money well spent if it just sat in my collection. So ultimately I'm very glad that I didn't buy this. Next up is this palette from Natasha Denona. So I'm a huge fan of the original Natasha Denona Glam Face palette. I absolutely love that palette, love the 5 eyeshadow shades, love the 2 face shades, love the palette. So when this released around Valentine's Day, I was very interested in it. The thing that stuck out to me the most was, one, I loved the coloring of the outer packaging. I thought was so pretty, but I also loved the shade of the blush. I thought was really pretty. And then I was like, oh, 5 eyeshadow shades, 5 mauve tone shades, pretty. But then when I really, again, started to like peel back the layers and decide whether or not it really made sense to my makeup collection, I was like, I do not reach the first 2 pink shades, the matte pinks. I'm like, I'm never gonna reach for those. I do not reach for matte pink shades such as those. So I wouldn't get used out of those. maybe I would get use out of that brown middle shade and the 2 end shades, but like ultimately not worth it. And sometimes face palette, I've been actually really good about reaching for my face palette, so I'm not even gonna say sometimes my face palettes go unused. I just don't think I would have gotten use out of this palette. So I'm really glad that I didn't purchase that. A lot of you were saying, because I did post a video maybe around end of January, beginning of February, and I think it was Trying Not to Buy It was the name of the video, talking me out of releases I'm interested in. And a lot of you were saying that you didn't think I should purchase this palette either. There was questions about the quality, etc. Next palette is the Colourpop Pearls on Point palette. So I did end up purchasing the Colourpop Sage the Day palette, and I actually planned to purchase both of these palettes at once. But then I ultimately talked myself out of purchasing both and just went with the Sage the Day, which I wasn't super impressed with the Sage the Day palette. I actually was really let down. Again, that blue brown shade. Colourpop just cannot make a blue brown shade these days. They just don't do it right. But the Pearls on Point palette, I'm like, I just wouldn't, like, this would not have added anything new to my collection, wouldn't have added value. And even though I want to say the palette was only like $14, like that's $14 I can buy like almost buy a Tower 28 lip jelly with, and I would be happier with the Tower 28 lip jelly. So ultimately very happy that I didn't purchase that. Okay, this is an older one, but I was so close to purchasing this. And also there's been other releases from this brand that I have purchased, and while making other purchases on this brand's website, I have considered tossing the Malibu Barbie palette in my bag with my Glamlight orders. But like, what part of this color story, aside from like the 2 matte browns, like what part of this color story, maybe one of the purples, would I really use? Like, and actually, like, looking at the palette, it's more like the Barbie outer packaging that makes me more interested in this than the actual color story of the shadows. Glamlight makes a great formula, and I've seen some really beautiful looks created with this palette, don't get me wrong, but I just do not think I would have used it. So very glad that I didn't purchase that, even though I do think my daughter would love this palette, especially with that Barbie outer packaging. It's the collab that like makes me want it more than the color story. Still glad that I didn't buy it. And then the 10th and final palette that I am glad that I didn't purchase is the Sigma Alice in Wonderland palette. Whew. Was I so close to purchasing this palette. I can't remember who I saw creating a look with this or reviewing this palette, but I had wanted this palette, talked myself out of it, and then saw a video of someone creating a look with it, and I was like, ooh. Logged onto the website again, it was in my cart, and then I was like, I'm gonna wait, think about it for like another day. And then ultimately I did never end up purchasing this palette, and I'm glad, because I look at the color story again, and I think it's like the green that draws my attention and that light blue shade. But aside from that, looking at this palette, it kind of confuses me, and I don't naturally think of looks that I personally would create with this, or visually, like, my mind can't come up with a lot of looks that I personally would feel comfortable creating for myself. So I just do not think that I would have gotten use out of this palette. I think that the packaging was really well thought out. Like, I loved the artwork on the front, but I just do not think I would have gotten use out of this palette. So I'm very glad that I decided to skip on that one as well. Whew. After that one, you guys, that is gonna wrap it up for today's video. Those are 10 eyeshadow palettes that I personally almost purchased, but glad I didn't. Would love to know in the comments below, do you have any palettes that fall into this, or are you really good at just not buying all the eyeshadow? I've been better this year, could be better, even more. But thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what other eyeshadow palette themed content you would like to see from me. Thank you for supporting me, for supporting my channel, for supporting Palette Week. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.